You're listening to the Unstoppable Podcast, the go-to place for everyone to learn about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web. Welcome to the Metaverse. GM, welcome to the Unstoppable Podcast. My name is Josh Gordon. Today, we're talking all things Metaverse, digital identity with one of the experts in this space, someone that I've looked for to learn about what the Metaverse is, what the future will look like. Herman, CEO and co-founder of Improbable. Thank you so much for joining us today. How you doing?
Good, very good. Looking forward to talking.
Yeah, I mentioned this right before we started recording, but I got your book, showed it on screen,
Awesome.
Virtual Society, the Metaverse, and the New Frontiers of Human Experience. I've been reading through it and found it really fascinating, and just the way you're walking us through history, showing us how the Metaverse has impacted the past, how it's going to impact the future. And I think your takes are just really, really fresh on the subject. So I want to start off here and ask you, what sparked your passion and your curiosity for the Metaverse? Because this isn't new for you. This has been something you've been thinking about and working around for many years now, right?
Yeah, I think even before I got into computing and technology and games, I was always fascinated by other worlds and other realities. I think, many kids read about, magical places and stories and Narnia and the rest of it. I think as a kid, for me, my reaction wasn't, oh, cool story. It was like, wait a minute, and this isn't real? We can't go here? This doesn't exist? How I felt kind of cheated. So I think I've always been on a bit of a lifelong quest to try to make the bigger possibilities we can dream of, places we can really experience. And I think, as I talk about a lot in the book, I don't think that's something that I'm alone in. I think a lot of human culture and experience is about grasping at some other reality or other world or more that could exist and could be. And I think that's what's always driven me. And then when I got into computer science and video games and developing technology, pretty much my entire life has been spent on this problem, one way or the other. It's taken a lot longer than I thought, I have to say. I didn't think I didn't think it would take quite this long, but it's quite exciting, the progress that we've made.
Yeah, I mean, even I think a lot of the future that you lay out, when I read through some of it, it still feels like it's a ways away. But the reason behind why some of it could be needed seems to make sense, and that's what I hope to run through with you, over the next 30 minutes or so. But one, I think you might have even started the book with this, but it was a great opening line. You said, one day this book will be read by a person without a body. And I kind of want to know, one day someone will be listening to this podcast without a body. So what is that like? What do you have to say to that future person that's bodiless, that's still maybe in the Metaverse, engaging with our content today? Like, if you had one thing to say to them.
It's funny, but we take so many things for granted as being fundamental to our experience, but actually they were made up. My favorite one is writing. Language has emerged many times in human history, but writing has actually only emerged a couple of times. And almost all written languages are then derivations from those original languages. For example, I believe the letter, I think it's an S, comes originally from a hieroglyph in ancient Egyptian that then became simplified, then went into a sound that a snake made, and then that went into a kind of Abrahamic language, and then that went into English, and all the way from prehistory we can see written language kind of being this thing that we invented once or twice, and then completely transformed our way of looking at the world. The fact that we can write things down, and the fact that we have this literary world, and that I can pick up a book and listen to and read from Marcus Aurelius or something is magical, is wondrous. I think the thing I'd ask that person in the future, who is as far away from us as we are from the invention of writing in the way that their human experience has changed, is I would try to get them to explain to me what that moreness feels like. It's like when to give another attempt at sort of explaining this. When you're a kid, you look at the world a certain way, and we can all remember what it was like to be 7, 8, 9 years old.
Yeah.
And the things that mattered to you in your life, how quickly time seemed to go by, or how important every day seemed, how important falling over or a chocolate bar seemed. What would you ask an adult? How would you talk to an adult about their inner experience? It'd be very difficult to even communicate about how far away they were from you in their thinking and their understanding. And I think as we develop the metaverse and massively expand our human experience, and then develop technology to plug into the metaverse, that moreness, that fundamental expansion, it almost makes it hard to think about how you would communicate with that being, right? Because there's so much more to their experience of life than yours.
Totally. I mean, I like as you were talking, I'm like, maybe I should just ask Chat GPT real quick and see what they say. But I think that I've noticed that version of AI will just kind of say, I'm not. My purpose isn't supposed to be to tell you how I feel, or I'm just telling you what the data is or what it says online. And so you can't really even ask it about its moreness in your words, right now, and in that future world.
You can, but also I think that the dream of the kind of, and here I'm stepping into a domain that I'm not an expert in.
Yeah.
I'm just passionate about and I've read a lot about. But one of the funny, dirty secrets of AI is that a lot of the development in AI we see now originally began inspired by our biology and our brains, but now has almost nothing to do with it. So this incredible evolution that we see in kind of neural networks and the way that they function, that's not at all like really how our brain does what it does. I mean, there's a reason why like a 17-year-old can learn how to drive a car with like 10 lessons, but it takes 1 billion hours for like a self-driving car to maybe figure it out, despite being so powerful. Like so the moreness of an AGI, the moreness of an AI that is fully evolved is like a different species to the moreness of a human being. And what a lot of people would think of as transhumanism, or like the evolution of the human experience. And I think in some ways, in our kind of current cultural thinking, it's a little bit bleak, right? Because we see AI making all this progress, but human beings and human experience doesn't seem to be growing in the same way. And there's a lot of anxiety and fear, and they're always, about being replaced or being kind of being lost. I like to think of my book, but also the metaverse and the vision of growing human experience as sort of like an alternative to that, right? Like, let AI become really good at solving all of our real world problems, and let's use technology to make our own experiences even more incredible, and somehow grow what it means to be human. That's what I'm most interested in.
Yeah, no, totally. It reminds me of the book Sapiens, and it kind of
great book, really great book,
good book. All of a sudden, I'm blanking on the author, but it kind of concludes with saying,
was that not Yuval Harari?
Yes, that was it.
Yeah.
And it concludes with saying, kind of like a call out to the future human species, and because it's walked through all the different species that have led us up to now, and you recognize the fact that today's human is different from the human of many, many, many years ago. And so why would we think that tomorrow's human wouldn't be different again? And, in our current form, you get skeptical to it. You resist that change. You think we're at the peak of what we can be. But I think a lot of what you talk about, I mean, just the metaverse in general, it makes us think about what a future world will look like that's different than ours. And some people don't like that, right?
Yeah, and we don't really value, I talk about this in the book, but we're at a very weird period in our culture. The psychology of behaviorism, which was a product of the kind of early last century in some ways, almost denied the value of inner experience, right? Like inner experience and communicating your inner experience, your dreams, your thoughts, how you think, the mental technologies about the way you think, kind of became a little bit unpopular for a while. And then like people like Noam Chomsky kind of like totally revolutionized psychology and brought back this magical idea that we have these rich inner worlds. And I'm oversimplifying here greatly, but I think that, what I'd like to see a lot more of is tools, experiences, entertainment that enrich that inner experience and allow us to grow that inner experience and to take it into different directions. And when you talk about future humans, the other thing I think that's often missed, I think a little bit in Sapiens and missed in a lot of our talk about AI and missed in a lot of our talk about the future, is we tend to think of the future in this very singular way, right? Like things advance in this really, really linear way. Like imagine movies about advanced AI. They're like godlike beings that are perfect at everything. But when we look at nature, that's not what we see. What we see is you have to make choices and trade-offs, right? You have to balance efficiency of energy with resources, with the time it takes to do something. Like a turtle is evolved a certain way, a whale is evolved another way, a human being is evolved another way. So I think what's interesting is we'll probably, as I talk about in my book, as we sort of evolve and grow, I think we'll see a speciation, a separation. I think we'll see many destinations, many different kinds and ways of living. There might be some people that really want to spend a lot of their time in virtual worlds. There might be other people that want to spend that time really differently. And so that diversity really excites me, of that future.
Dang, we're 10 minutes in. We've already talked about biology, psychology, AI, metaverse. I mean, okay, I'm loving this. This is exactly the kind of conversation I thought we were going to have today. So, all right, let's set a foundation here real quick. It's a definition I think you've given before, but for the listeners of the podcast, let's define metaverse. Is it a crypto world? Is it
Great.
only accessible via VR? Is it a browser-based
So
experience? How do you define it?
great. So we really have to step away from any particular technologies and tools. When we
Okay.
want to make really good definitions of things, we have to think more abstractly, and we have to think of a definition that'll still be useful 50 years from now or 100 years from now, right? So for me, the metaverse is a network of socially constructed realities. So an example of a socially constructed reality is sport, right? Like the world of football, like literally does not matter, but it matters deeply. It's a socially constructed reality with all kinds of meaning, identity, things that happen, events that occur, things we agree upon. Religion is another example. Fashion is another example. Different communities are other examples. These socially constructed realities are networked together into a network in which value can be transferred from one to the other. So an event that happens in the world of sport creates real world value in the economy, creates real fulfillment for a human being that might have supported that home team, and really affects the world. So that's what the metaverse is. It's a network of socially constructed realities. Now, where does technology come into it? Well, technology lets us actually create physically visible and interactable virtual spaces, which mean that we can go from the metaverses of the past and the present, which are pretty abstract, like culture and the kind of examples I've just used,
Yeah.
to really tangible places we can visit and interact with, and whose relationship with the real world can become much, much richer. And what's very, very important in the definition of the metaverse that I'm providing here is it's all about the exchange of value between worlds. And that is something that separates the metaverse from video games in a traditional sense. Like, video games are amazing. They're great. They're really wonderful. But what happens in the world of Warcraft kind of only matters in the World of Warcraft, right? The difference is what happens in the world of sport actually affects the real world in a really profound way. So I think of the digital versions of the metaverse that my company and other companies are creating as being different from video games because they involve the creation of real world value. And that's really where crypto comes into it and where Web3 comes into it. Because if you're going to create value and transfer value, you need some way to do that. And if you're going to do that in the digital domain, you need a tool to do that. And kind of the only tool we have that seems to work well to make that happen is the technology of Web3. So for me, the catalyst in going from a metaverse of ideas and culture, sport and fashion to a metaverse of tangible, visible virtual realities isn't VR headsets. It's the ability for value to be transferred back and forth. And that's why I think crypto is probably the most important tool in making that happen.
Because crypto allows you to own these digital assets and link between different worlds.
Yeah, like before there was writing, the only way that you could hear from someone long dead was from a story passed on to have passed on and passed on and passed on, right?
Yeah.
Like ideas couldn't live and evolve and grow and be commented on and evolve. And before there was digital assets in crypto, there was no way for the intangible value that is created in not just virtual experiences, but in other ways to actually become something ownable and transferable. Like if I were to meet Cristiano Ronaldo in a virtual stadium of thousands and have this incredible moment with him, that moment could become something tangible and tradable and ownable. And I could pass it down to my children. But I couldn't do that in the real world, right? Because there's no way for me to kind of capture it. So I often think of the creation of writing. I know it's a bit lofty, but I often think of writing and NFTs and crypto as having a lot of very interesting parallels. It's not something I got onto a lot in the book, but I think it's a pretty interesting way of looking at things.
Totally. Okay, you talked about a lot of things right there. I mean, we went from sport to video games. The definition of the metaverse was great. I appreciate that thoroughness. Let's dive into sport real quick a little bit more, especially because World Cup's going on, so good time to discuss it. Now, like sports, these events happen and you say it creates economic value in society. And is that just from the whole economy around sport? And in the metaverse, you can create, infinite worlds where activities are going on that people care about. And then, funds go in and flow
let's take
out.
sport. Yeah, let's take sport as an example. Sport creates an absolutely enormous amount of value in our world.
because we
Like
care
if
about
you're a
it.
cricket fan in India, if you're because we care about it, right? If you're a cricket fan in India or a soccer fan in Brazil or an Arsenal fan in the UK or whatever it might be, this is more than the phrase "football is life" is not like thrown around. Sport can become as important to someone as religion, and it is a deep and vital fabric in many societies and in many ways of bringing people together. But actually, sport is profoundly undermonetized. Like it is really, really bad at making money relative to the importance that it has in people's lives. And and the people that get screwed over the most, I think, actually are often the players, performers, and other people, because the only way sport can really make money indirectly and directly is through ticket sales and advertising.
Yeah.
And these are really, really inefficient ways to make money. Like, often you'll hear about a big sports star and the majority of their income doesn't come from the fact that they're great at their sport. It comes from like the fact that they're in like Accenture adverts or whatever, right? So the power of the metaverse is to be able to enable virtual experiences where, first of all, thousands of fans can meet and interact that would never normally be able to come to a game. Like imagine, 100,000 fans from around the world speaking their own languages all at the same time, all in the same world. They can meet celebrities and stars and interact with them in ways they never could. And they can actually collectively create value and have experiences that produce real digital assets. And those digital assets ultimately are a more efficient way for stars, for clubs, for sports, and for fans to monetize and engage in their fandom and in what they do.
Yeah.
So sport for me is a really, really good example. If you want to see the real value of the metaverse, take any cultural institution, look at its value to us, psychologically, and how much money it makes. And the delta in that is the opportunity. Right? The delta in that is the opportunity. Like, how do we actually monetize better than just advertising?
Yeah. I mean, so maybe we'll dive into a couple more of these examples. I don't know if you would classify sport as a new frontier, but when I was going through a lot of your work, you say that the metaverse is basically it's the antithesis of society's descent into tech escapism. And I kind of view that as just scrolling on your phone, social media, ads and whatnot, and maybe passive consumption of video. And you say like instead it's a way to explore new positive frontiers. So it sounds to me like there's a new way for us to explore the sport frontier. Are there others you'd like to call out?
Yeah, but it's important to be very rigorous here, right? And draw a distinction. I want to take us from a society of people that just consume and watch to a society of people that get to interact and participate. So in my example of the stadium with 100,000 people in it, they're not just watching the game. They're like actually, antagonistically interacting with the opposing fans in a way that would never be possible in the real world. They're expressing themselves in really profound ways that, in the real world would get them arrested, like, shooting fireworks off or, forming, huge human chains or, celebrating or interacting in different ways or even playing games that, it ultimately interact with the world of the sport. So the interactivity is very important. And that's not just an intuition. It's grounded in kind of really hard science, which is the science of self-determination theory. Like we need a diet of fulfilling experiences, interactive experiences for us to really self-actualize as human beings. You don't get that diet fulfilled by just watching. You have to be in the story. You have to be part of the story. So that's the potential of interactive entertainment in the metaverse. It's to give more people the opportunity for more fulfillment. It's also one of the reasons why I've been so focused on making sure from a technical perspective that you can access things on phones and on low bandwidth environments. Because I think the people this is most going to impact are actually people in parts of the world that really have no access to the kinds of experiences that you and I take for granted.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really big change that we should be supporting.
Interesting. I feel like I've talked about it before on the active versus passive, but in kind of different contexts, how just NFTs take us from this passive consumption of media to active collection. Like just the act of collecting starts getting you more engaged with the things you're consuming. And it's not necessarily playing a game or lots of communication back and forth. It's really just a simple tap of a couple buttons and all of a sudden you've collected something. But it is one more step closer to maybe a world that you're describing here where it's really back and forth and engaging.
Yeah, you really need differentiated and fulfilling experiences for people to want to stick around. One of the reasons why a lot of what Improbable does is support thousands of people in the same place at the same time is that it's a niche that is not filled by video games and not very well filled in the real world either. It's actually quite hard to have those experiences in the real world. I mean, how many times a year do you ever do that? So I'm really curious about the power of big communities coming together at once, and I particularly think it interplays well with celebrity as well.
Mm. Well, let's dive into games real quick a little bit more here. I
Sure.
just thought it's interesting for me to read because I haven't thought about games from this perspective really before, about how they meet some of your basic psychological needs and in ways that jobs don't. And, thinking about how a lot of our work these days is kind of based off of industrial practices of the past. I mean, even just the 8-hour workday, right? That's based off of what
Yeah,
factory
you saw
schedules.
that. That was a. I really enjoyed researching that chapter. I was actually pretty surprised by how random some of the reasons why we do these things are.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
partner, she's a therapist and is really big into talking about how society these days pushes us to be so productive. And I notice it in myself sometimes, and in a lot of my friends. Everyone's talking about productivity, and if you don't have a side hustle, if you're not doing something outside of work, all of a sudden, like, are you worthy? And just trying to step back from that and say there's other things that can deem your worth outside of just some of these productive pursuits. But like, I think that and I think that's why this gaming section caught my attention, because you're saying that games can meet some of these psychological needs for fulfillment that oftentimes we search for in work. And so, can you dive in a little bit, like, why will the
Yeah, I
metaverse
mean, I
make
think
games
it's actually
better?
even more than that. I mean, like, so video games are one subset of an almost endless landscape of experiences that you could have in a virtual space. And
Okay.
all the research tells us that if you make a friend virtually, that's just a friend. If you have a job virtually, that's just a job. If you have an incredible adventure virtually, that's just an incredible adventure. There's nothing that makes that less fulfilling than if it were to, a real friend and a virtual friend, they're the same thing. They're both friends. So games as an industry, as a video games industry, they focus on a very narrow set of genres, and they're only able to produce a certain selection of experiences. And that's not because of technology. That's actually more to do with the economics of video games. It's extremely hard to draw in users and monetize them for new video games. And there's a lot of problems in investing in new content. I mean, it's very, very expensive. There's a reason why, if you look at the big games companies right now, what they mostly do is they spit out franchise games over and over and over again,
Yeah.
because it's so expensive to kind of innovate and to try new things. There are other experiences like, 50,000 people hanging out with Taylor Swift. That's not a great video game. It might be an awesome one-off experience that's really fulfilling. It could be one of the most fulfilling experiences of your life, if you're a big fan, and you get to really interact. But it wouldn't make for a very good video game. So the metaverse is essentially, by being a network where value can be exchanged from world to world. This is one of the things we've done with M Squared. It makes it economically viable for people to build and share experiences that wouldn't be viable as standalone video games. So the kind of comparison that I use here is like theater, television, and film. All three of them involve scripts and actors, but they're very different businesses, and they have very different business models.
Yeah.
So a lot of the confusion in the discourse about the metaverse is like that gaming companies are going to build the metaverse. Not only will gaming companies not build the metaverse, they don't want to build the metaverse because it involves sharing users and value with other games, which is the exact opposite of what they want to do. They've been, fighting to retain users against other companies.
I talked to Axie Infinity about composability and interoperable game assets, and with they actually shared, like, horizontal interoperability really isn't something they want to focus on right now, because they said, we've spent so much time acquiring a user base. Why do we want to give it to you? They said we're focused on vertical interoperability, having these assets
Exactly.
working on different parts of the
Exactly.
chain.
Exactly. That's why with M Squared, we provided this amazing technology, but we force every partner to agree to interoperability to a certain extent. And what that does is it's attracted partners who have great content and great communities, but don't necessarily want to build, the same old video games. They want to build content that actually builds off of each other. Like, if you think about the real world, sport interrupts really well with fashion and music, right? Like, if you go to a baseball game, often there's music from someone that you recognize,
Yep.
and people are wearing clothes from a fashion brand that you recognize.
Fa-
Our real
fashion's
world
taking
culture
over
is a
the
lot
sport
more
world.
integrated.
Totally.
There we go, right? So I think the metaverse is likely to involve a lot of new content, which is designed from the ground up to be supportive of other content in the network, and around economics, which create shared value in the network. It's also why we built, the M Squared network the way we did, which is, to kind of share value with all of the content creators in the way that it's structured.
Yeah. So will some of these games, I mean, it sounds to me like some of these games will just be fun, they will be experiences, but will people be working in the metaverse to like capture this value
So
as like a full-time job?
it's a longer conversation I think than we can probably fit in here. But once you establish the basic sequence of principles,
Yeah.
it becomes clear that that will happen because people seek fulfillment. And let's take an example of a fulfilling experience. Imagine being like a thief in a city is a fulfilling experience, right? Like in a virtual world. Like
People get a
you're an
rush.
incredible thief. You could get a huge rush, right? And it could be a really complicated kind of career or vision. There used to be a really great old game called Thief on PC that I really loved. You know, imagine really embodying the career of being a thief. Well, for that to be fun, really engaging, really fulfilling, there have to be a lot of other elements in that world. There's got to be a police force. There's got to be a bustling city. There's got to be people to steal from. There's got to be consequences to stealing from those people. There's got to be a whole society around you, right? So some of that other labor, that other work, might be naturally fun, but some of it might require people to act in ways that are consistent. If the police only sometimes show up, it's going to be pretty easy to be a thief. But if you kind of have to show up on time every day to be a policeman, that is a kind of a job that needs to be compensated or rewarded. So what you see in the economics of games, especially free-to-play games, is all of the money comes in from a tiny percentage of players. Like a big online shooter, like a tiny fraction of the player base, a few percentage points, are responsible for the majority of the revenue. So I could see a world where you see these sophisticated online games where the majority of people play for free, some people pay a lot of money for cool stuff, and some people are likely to actually work in the world to do jobs that are fun, but need to be done consistently in order to enable the fun for others.
And it's better
You know, a
to,
really good example is like being a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons, right? That's kind of a job. It's a lot of work involved, but you create fun for others.
and it's better to have that job done by a real person than it is by the computer.
You could probably argue that it has to be. This is an argument I haven't had the time to make in the book, but I really want to make. But I think you could
You heard it here
derive
live on the pod
with
first.
some certainty. Yeah, well, I think you could. I think you could almost prove that the job has to be done by a person or a creature that is part of your society for it to have the meaningful effect that is necessary to give you fulfillment. Like an example I would use is I would say if you could go back in time to the Roman Colosseum and you could replace all of the people dying there with robots.
Yeah.
The Romans were pretty brutal people. If you could tell the Romans, hey, these are all Westworld robots, it's all going to be exactly the same, I think they'd say, no, thank you. We want actual people to actually die. And that might sound horrible, but it's because the meaning, the actual purpose, the impact, the reality of that situation is very important. You know, it's the same with football. You know, when Brazil wins a game, that, you know, that's going to mean something to the players. That's going to change the nature of the trajectory of the life of that goal scoring hero. Consequences are very important. If if you replace human beings with NPCs, you remove the ability for consequential experiences, and therefore you remove the ability for you to be fulfilled. Perhaps in some far future we might never require one another, but I think in the near term, it actually creates more opportunities for fulfillment, for jobs, for work, for people.
Totally. It kind of makes me think of a thought I've had myself. I don't know if I've shared it on, I might have tweeted it once, but it's just kind of, there's so much talk about the blockchain being like this data that anyone can read. But the truth is most people have no idea how to go in and verify that things are what they are, or that this ledger is really immutable. But it's not that you can go do it now easily. It's that someone could. Kind of like the same reasoning behind you need to know it's real people. Like you need to know you can do it, and that's sometimes enough for people.
Yeah, it's exactly. I guess you could almost summarize my book as almost saying that we are all a lot more irrational than we think we are. And rather than pretending that that's going to go away, we should understand that the trajectory of our society, of what we value, will be structured around that irrationality. I mean, just think of it like a copy of an amazing Van Gogh painting versus the painting itself. Like, I can't tell the difference, but I definitely want to own the original. But what is the difference, really, between the original and the copy? Only the meaning, only the idea that this one was, touched by the hands of the great master. Like, it's a pretty made up difference in some senses, right? But we care about it.
Okay. So we're 30 minutes in, covered a lot of ground. There's two areas I really want to dive in before we hop off. So we're going to jump into them.
Sure.
So one thing I want to dive into here is we talked a lot at this high level conceptual about the metaverse. Can we do a little like 1, 3, 5 years out and paint the picture of what
Sure.
we might see over that time frame? Help people understand what we'll be doing and how we'll be using some of this metaverse tech in really the near and medium term. Is there?
I would say the most likely near-term value proposition will be in sports, fashion, music, and culture, where stars, celebrities, and brands will do events and experiences that would be either just impossible in the real world, or couldn't reach those audiences, or couldn't be as interactive. Those experiences will be monetized with digital assets, and they'll be linked together, through networks like our Squared network, but probably through other means as well. And that's going to create a lot more money for these cultural institutions. I think that's phase one. I think in phase two, we're going to see more like video game like experiences. They just take longer to build. And I think those video game like experiences will benefit from actually having access to the same assets and items that already exist inside those other places. So imagine, the fun of a role playing game or a battle royale game where you can access all of those assets. It's quite different from what we have now, but I think that's phase two. I think in phase three, we start to see, completely different approaches, like entire economies that are built around persistent universes that are structured around digital assets and other phases. That would be my guess, but these things never quite go the way you think they will.
Yeah. And when it comes to that first phase with like celebrity and athletes playing a part, we've seen celebrities make a splash in the NFT scene, and it caused a lot of hype. Definitely some momentum, everything from Steph Curry getting a Bored Ape to, Snoop Dogg and whatnot. But sometimes their involvement is kind of in and out, and it's not always consistent. And I wonder if some of that phase one, people will make a splash and then kind of remove themselves after they've captured value without necessarily pouring back.
Yeah, I don't necessarily even mean celebrities like that. Like, if you're a Twitch streamer today, how do you hang out with your community?
Yeah.
Like, how do you really have your own environment where you can, do cool stuff and have a fun experience with that community, create with them, build with them, do with them? If you're a YouTuber, if you're a newscaster, right? So I think the idea of interactive, community-driven events is probably a good starting point for the value of the metaverse, because they're short, they're cheap, they're engaging. There's something that can add value to people who have big audiences but can't monetize those audiences very well. They don't naturally fit into video games. Like, no one wants to download World of Warcraft in order to hang out with Steph Curry. That doesn't make any sense, right? Like, that's like a very complicated journey to doing that. And they probably make sense in the context of the digital asset economy. I'm not talking here about celebrities promoting NFTs. I'm talking about celebrities and brands and companies creating experiences that are natural extensions of why these people matter to begin with. Like, imagine, hanging out with a stand-up comedian in a virtual world where the interactivity, the gameplay, and the fun extends the comedy in some direct way, right? That's what I'm talking about here. Like, imagine a watch party, for a show you love with a bunch of other fans, interacting together. And all of this really centers on the quite complicated problem of rich, very interactive, and highly concurrent events, which are the niche, I think, that will drive the most growth to begin with. I think after that, we get into a much, much more interesting kind of space. But it just feels like the area where you can get the most value fastest.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good explanation. Good explanation. Definitely be seeing who's making that splash first. I think there's, always risk going first and also some benefits. So it'll be interesting to see who tries. But I also want to talk about identity before we end this pod, because the metaverse and your digital identity, I think, so intertwined. We've talked about a lot of elements of that throughout, but a question I have around digital identity is, do you ever see that digital version of you being more important than the physical one, or can they be separated like that?
I think it's going to be weirder than that. Like, I think we're living in the last era where you're one person. I think as you have many different worlds in which you play many different roles, maybe even earn incomes, maybe even have different sets of friends, I think you're going to end up, I call it kind of the multiversal self. So I think it's an opportunity for people to be many different kinds of people. And I think that's a great thing, like, who wouldn't want to try being someone completely different, living a totally different life? That is the power of what we're all collectively creating, the freedom for you to be more and to have more options. So I think we will go from being one person with one identity to collections of identities. And in some cases, those identities can be more valuable than the real world. Like, I mean, as an example, I'm friends with a person on Twitter called Bodilon. and I don't know who they are in the real world. And I've like spoken to them a few times and like, messaged them back and forth. But I only know them as this made up identity. And it's kind of weird because that's a real person to me, but that's also a made up person, right? In many ways. So I think we're already in the age where a virtual identity can be a tangible thing with a real reputation and real value.
Interesting. I guess the splitting, how you describe kind of splitting them up or being able to live multi versions of you, whether it's simultaneously or at different times, I guess we kind of see small elements of that with people will make multiple Instagram accounts, one for their business, one for themselves. Maybe they make a Finsta, like a fake Instagram. And that's the most basic level of identity I could think of listening to that. But sometimes there's advantages of splitting it up, and sometimes there's advantages of kind of keeping all that reputation associated with your identity under one person, So I wonder, will we want to split up and I'll be this version of Josh over here and another version of Josh over there? Or do I want to be both those people? And I mean, can I? I don't know. I guess it's a question we'll figure out.
I think more options, more choice, more freedom for more experiences. That should be our goal. Like the last 100 years were about more productivity. And for a while, that meant more happiness in some ways. I think the next 100 years should be about more experiences, more opportunities to be more fulfilled, to try more things, to have a richer inner life.
Yeah.
And I think optionality is key. There are also people, and we should recognize this, whose real world identities are not very well respected. Maybe because of their race, their culture, their sexuality. Maybe they're struggling with their identity in some form, or their identity is fluid in some way. I think virtual worlds give you a very level playing field in which you can actually try to be who you want to be, and maybe even experiment with an identity that turns out not to be the identity for you, in the real world. So that's going to be scary for a lot of people, but that's the real opportunity here. We need to move beyond the short-term thinking about is Meta going to own is Meta going to own the metaverse, and which crypto token is more or less valuable, and look at the bigger picture, which is we have an opportunity to build a much more fulfilling society. And our current society is not very fulfilling for a lot of people. If we can do that, if we can increase fulfillment and opportunity and increase the richness of ideas people have, that's a net good for everyone, right? Like that's a different kind of wealth, and that's what motivates me.
Yeah, no, I love that take. I thought for a second there as you were describing that, like, man, isn't it a little sad that for those people whose physical identities aren't as respected or safe for various, like a lot of reasons that you kind of touched on there, they might find opportunity in this digital world that gives them much more freedom or ability to live that identity. It could also, like, I think there's something a little sad about that, but at the same time, there's a positive in terms of that digital world being able to play out with just more freedom, how it can then influence back to the physical world. Someone is able to be all these different identities, and all of a sudden the physical world becomes much more there's like more acceptance, there's more just awareness, all that.
Yeah, I mean, more experiences can only result in a richer body of knowledge that allows you to maybe better cope with or to better handle. We have this misconception that video games and virtual worlds are an escape from your problems. I think anybody who's struggled with Dark Souls will tell you you're not escaping from any problems when you're struggling or playing, or video games are often actually frustrating, challenging, difficult, deep investments of time and energy, right? They're not an escape, but they are an alternative place to find fulfillment. And I think what people need to recognize more is that you can create value there and bring that value right back to your real life. And people do that in all kinds of ways. So that's what I think the focus should be. Hence my definition of metaverse as being about the exchange of value between worlds.
Yep.
And I think other people have gotten lost in defining it as being about VR or, prettier graphics or avatar interoperability. Those all feel to me like things we won't be discussing in 15 years. I think what we'll be discussing in 15 years is this social impact. It's the meaning of these stuff.
Yep. Great. All right. Let's kind of wrap up here. I've got, it's kind of funny, I've got 2 rapid fire questions for sections of questions.
Go for it. I got to jump shortly too, so we should go fast.
Okay. So just to summarize, What is a meaningful interaction? I just want like a very like succinct, just so people can take that away. What is a meaningful interaction?
A meaningful interaction is one in which you are psychologically fulfilled as a result of that interaction. There are three forms of fulfillment that psychology recognizes: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So, maybe you got to make a meaningful choice that mattered. Maybe you got to feel like you improved at something. Maybe you got to actually mean something to someone else. So that's what I would do. That's what I would call a meaningful interaction. If you want a really simple test, like if you can answer the question, were you there? And that's a meaningful thing to have answered, then an event was probably important, right? Like nobody says, were you there when you talk about watching the last episode of Game of Thrones? Like, did you watch it? Not were you there, right? But you do talk about were you there when you think about a party or like in a cool event that happened publicly. So that meaning, I would say, is either defined in the psychological sense or in the social historical sense.
Yep. Great. Who's a influential Web3 creator, entrepreneur, collector that's inspired you?
I gotta say, I'm pretty damn inspired by Gordon and Gaga from Yuga, to be honest. I mean, the community they've created, the speed with which they've done that has been amazing. People I find super inspiring as well, really inspiring in many ways. I think all three of those folks have shown an ability to be really authentic with their community that is like quite profound.
Yep. Same with me. Who's okay, second question. What's your favorite NFT?
I can't answer that question. I'm too biased with too many. I couldn't answer that question.
Okay.
I can't do it. I can't. I work with too many different companies that would be like annoyed with any answer I gave. So I can't answer that.
All right. Someone will just have to do some find your wallet, see what you're holding. Third question, last question. This is going to be a big one for you. I can feel it already. But in 5 years, what's the craziest thing we'll be doing in the metaverse that we're just not thinking about yet, or maybe that we didn't talk about yet on this pod?
I think there'll be some weird like yearly event or like cultural moment, kind of like the Olympics or like a sporting event that has like 1 million participants, like some crazy like, global event or festival or experience where people come together in a way we've really never experienced before. Like a mass concurrent event or experience that becomes an important part of our culture. That's just a guess. It's a little bit like how that Times Square kind of just, if you know the history of how the kind of Times Square became New York's kind of party and NYE and beyond, I think we'll end up with something like that in the metaverse that'll become an unexpected but important part of our lives.
All right. Well, I'm expecting that experience to be powered by Improbable with millions and billions of people there at once.
Hey, that's the plan. So I hope it works out that way.
All right.
Great.
Well,
thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, let us know, where can we find you on Twitter after listening to this pod or online?
Oh, I'm just at Herman Narula, and I'm always tweeting around, so I'm there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciated the conversation and learned a lot. Appreciate everybody listening.
Thank you.
Catch you at next week's episode of the Unstoppable Podcast.
So, and I'd be remiss. My publisher will strangle me if I don't plug the book and say most of what we've talked about is in Virtual Society. So if you want to go deeper, it's all there.
Virtual Society. It's been a good read. So appreciate it, Herman. I'll catch you later.